study tips and strategies. Okay, so this one, I cannot emphasize enough. If there's one thing that you try to master in your undergrad days, it's this, your study strategies. It took me so long to understand that I am not the type of person to sit across from a really old school professor where they just throw facts at me for 2-3 hours and I write them down on a piece of paper. It's just not me. And it took me a long time to understand that, because I used to think going to a class and sitting in that classroom was equivalent to me being a good student, or was equivalent to me thinking, if I go to class, I'll get a good grade. That's not how it works. If you're not someone who can sit across from a professor, then try and find a different strategy of studying. So I felt like I was really good at listening to podcasts. So if your school or if your undergrad program does provide podcasts or recorded lectures, then maybe start using those. I used to listen to them at like 2-3 times the speed, because I felt like it kept me engaged. If it was someone who was talking way too slowly for me, I would kind of become disengaged and start to daydream a little bit. So try and figure out what's your study strategy. And then create short study slots. Okay, I cannot believe how many people come and tell me that they've been studying all day, like 12 hours a day they've been studying. I find that so hard to believe that you've retained anything. Okay, sure, you might be trying to cram things before an exam, but that's not a healthy way to study, and it's not a healthy way to actually be a learner for the rest of your life. So try and get into the habit of making yourself a study schedule, stick it through, try and stick to that discipline. Don't give up on it. Don't just implement it 1 week in your life and then give up. But be a good learner, learn your learning style while you're young, because you're going to be having to apply it for the rest of your life, even after you finish professional school. So the last thing is, this is something that really helped me. Try and be an active learner instead of a passive learner. So I used to, in my my first years of undergrad, I used to just sit there and I used to try and sink in as much knowledge as I could from people speaking at me. But in my later years, what I started to do was actually taking the content that they were saying, turning it into a question, writing down the question, which is what I have given you on the right-hand side, like an example, writing down the question and then making answers underneath that question. So instead of writing, what is dental caries, and then writing down all the answers. Dental caries is a cavity. Dental caries is something that needs to be filled if it gets through the first and second layer of the tooth. So something that's active learning, because when you're going back and reviewing your notes, you should just be able to read the first line of that note, which is your question, which is something that's going to get your mind rolling. And then you should be able to answer the answers without even having to look at the page. So that's called active learning. And it comes to a point where you actually start writing down these questions, trying to think like your professors, because once you have a test, you start learning how your professor tests you and what kind of questions they ask you. So when you're reading over a PowerPoint or when you're reading over a textbook, you should be able to read a paragraph and say, this is the testable point. So I'm going to turn it into a question. I'm going to write down the answer for it. This is a great learning style, I think, even in life in general. This way, you're not just reading everything and just, taking it through one eye and out the other, but you're actually understanding it and you're turning things into a genuine question. So try this trick, see if it works on you. I know it definitely worked on me, so hopefully it does for you as well.